Hello, everyone. I am Chrissy Kelly, and I'm the founder of Absent, and I'd like to welcome you this evening to our webinar. You may notice that my background looks a little bit different. I'm in the process of moving, so I hope you don't mind that too much. This evening's guest is Hannah Diskin, and Hannah is clinical lead dietitian at the Long COVID Community Rehab Service at Leeds. And so I'd like to welcome you tonight, Hannah. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me. It's a great privilege to be here. Thank you.
Tonight, as usual with these webinars, Hannah and I will be talking a little bit about dietetics, what's going on with your diet if you've got parosmia. And over the course of the evening, we will, of course, be taking your questions. To send us a question, please use the question and answer panel, the Q&A panel, rather than the chat bar. That will help us keep all the questions organized. Right, so I think we will begin, Hannah, by asking you to tell us a little bit about yourself, your interest in long COVID and dietary problems that go with it. So over to you.
Thank you very much. Yeah, so I've been a dietitian for 18 years, working in a real range of settings, in hospitals, in community settings, with a real variety of different groups of people, from people with oncology to older people. And then I was really fortunate in October 2020 to become part of the Leeds long COVID rehab team. In Leeds, we were one of the first long COVID teams to get established. And we're a team that's made up of a few disciplines. So we have physios, occupational therapists within the team, psychology, myself, and a couple more dietitians. But I mean, I'm conscious that there are very similar long COVID teams all around the country in the UK, but not all of them have dietitians in them. And unfortunately, it's something that I'm quite passionate about. I think we need to change that. But when it comes to the sort of patients that we're seeing as dietitians in the long COVID service, the symptoms and the types of people we're seeing are really varied. They're not what I'd imagined when I started in this role. So I'd imagined, I think, more people who were quite frail, quite underweight, and really struggling with appetite. Whereas actually we do see people like that, but we also see people who have put a lot of weight on from being fatigued and being very inactive for a long period of time. People struggling with a lot of gastro symptoms. That's really quite significant with people with long COVID recovery. So changes in bowel habits, acid reflux, nausea, bloating. So a real raft of symptoms that we're supporting people with. And of course, these people don't just have one symptom, it's often several of those as well as of course the smell disorders, of course.
And of course, we try and keep the conversation focused on smell loss on our various platforms, but naturally all these other things that you've mentioned do come up. And I think that especially where parosmia is concerned, and this evening's the thrust of this evening's conversation really is about, what to do when you can't eat because your parosmia is really bad. And one of the things that people talk about quite a lot is nausea. And I'm wondering if you could give me your thoughts on this. I always assumed, because I've had it myself, that the nausea that comes from parosmia is associated with the parosmia, that it's coming from this feeling of disgust that you feel about so many foods. But do you see nausea without smell loss? Do you think that nausea could be part of the sort of long COVID changes in dietary habits?
Absolutely, yeah. Within people who are recovering and who have long COVID, we see nausea which can be caused by fatigue, nausea that can be caused by pain, migraines as well. And sometimes, of course, it's difficult to know what's causing the nausea, right. But that's the sort of link that we're making. I think fatigue can really cause nausea, as well as constipation, of course, and feeling bloated and uncomfortable, and the gut symptoms and acid reflux and nausea can be quite difficult to separate sometimes.
Right. Good. Well, that's okay. So let's talk first about what happens. And we know there is a small group of people who are having this happen to them. People who are really losing weight because they can't find any food to eat. Um, First of all, as a dietitian, how do you even start thinking about that? Do you just put people on the scale? How do you assess someone who is really not getting enough food?
Yeah, and I think it's really important to assess that and to screen that. So in dietetics, we talk about nutrition screening. So it's really finding those people where there is a problem. How do you know when you've lost too much weight? When should you be concerned? And there's various ways we can do that. And a really rough ready reckoner, we would, in dietetics, we would think, okay, has someone lost, and when we're talking about this weight loss, we're talking unintentional, of course, not trying to lose weight. If someone has unintentionally lost 3 kilograms of weight in 3 months, or 6 kilograms of weight in 6 months, we'd be starting to think, oh, there's a concern there. There's a concern. Right. But also another way, and if you like maths, this is another way of doing it. It's if you can calculate a percentage weight loss. So that would be your weight that you've lost divided by your original weight times by 100. That would give you a percentage weight loss. And that's a little bit more accurate because, of course, a proportion of weight that you've lost, 3 kilograms in someone who only weighs 30 kilograms is a lot more significant. Right. Compared to 3 kilograms in someone who perhaps weighs 100 kilograms. So looking at a percentage weight loss is a little bit more accurate. So if someone has lost 10% of their body weight, that is really a cause for concern. It's an early indicator of malnutrition, or not such an early indicator, actually. It's an indicator of malnutrition, a 10% weight loss. In that 6-month period, we're not going back too far, like over the years, not as accurate then, but a 10% weight loss in 6 months would also be a cause for concern. But what we've seen actually in the long COVID clinics is that measuring people's weight isn't actually always that helpful, because, as I said at the start, that people haven't always lost weight. And in fact, because of fatigue and being less active, people have actually put weight on while recovering from long COVID. Now, that doesn't mean, of course, that their diet's nutritionally balanced. Just right. Because the scales are saying, okay, your weight's the same, or you've put weight on, that's not meaning that their diet's okay. So what we invested in is a handy bit of kit in the long COVID clinics called a hand grip dynamometer, and that measures hand grip strength. And because what we know is that hand grip strength is an indicator of muscle strength. And what we're seeing is that people with long COVID, their hand grip strength is very low. It's less than you would be expecting for someone's age and gender. So that is an indicator, again, that people with long COVID, plus or minus with a smell disorder, are not getting perhaps enough protein, or certainly not getting a nutritionally adequate diet, because they're losing their muscle mass is lower than we would expect for them. There's other ways of doing a quick check as well, if you were interested in whether or not you've got an indicator of some early muscle loss. There's something that's quite nice called I just love the name, it's a Yubby Wacker test, which is a finger ring test. So if you connect your middle finger with your middle finger on your other hand, and your thumb with your thumb, and you make a ring, and then you sit with your knees at a 90-degree angle, and you measure that around your non-dominant calf. If your calf circumference is less than that ring you're making with your fingers, again, it's an indicator perhaps that you've got some muscle loss there. And that's in the research, that measure has been used with older people to detect frailty in older people, right. But it's also been looked at in people over the age of 40 as well. So right. It's not the be all and end all, it's an indicator and needs to be taken in context, but it's a little rough ready reckoner to look at whether or not your muscle stores are less than they should be.
Good. So thank you for that. So that's been a good introduction into how, you know, a person's weight can be made up of a lot of different things. And just because you had a static weight during your long COVID recovery, it doesn't necessarily mean that all is well in your dietary regime. And obviously, we know from our focus groups, from talking to people who have had parosmia on our platforms, that there are some significant challenges to getting the right kind of nutrition to keep the, you know, for people to keep themselves healthy, especially as they're recovering from long COVID. So let's, you know, given that there are so many foods that drop out of the diet of someone with parosmia, and by that I mean we're talking about things like meat, obviously very protein rich, eggs, there are things like onions and garlic, which are used commonly in cooking, and then there's a whole nother group that have certain kind of compounds in them that are disgusting for a different reason. That includes cucumbers and bell peppers and things like that. So we're seeing, not to mention, of course, coffee and chocolate. So we're seeing a lot of common foods being taken out of people's diets. And my question to you is, how are we going to start creating a dietary plan that makes up for any deficits that would occur if these things were not being included in your daily on your plate every day? So what kind of tips can you give us for getting good nutrition when the number of foods that are available to you are restricted?
And this will of course vary, won't it, depending on what people's safer food options are. But one good tip is about making sure that the foods that you choose are as nutrient dense as possible. And when we talk about nutrient dense foods, we're meaning foods that are going to give you more than just one nutrient. So you're wanting foods that are you know, going to give you a good range, and it's about making every mouthful count. You know, if your appetite isn't good and you're not enjoying food as much as possible. But of course, the importance of a nutritionally balanced diet is still so important despite that, and despite the challenges. So an example of a nutrient dense food would be dairy foods. So milk, for example, doesn't just have fluid in it. Again, fluid's really important. It doesn't just have calories, but it also has protein and calcium and some vitamins and minerals in there as well. So dairy foods are a really good example of a nutrient dense food. And a really nice tip that you can do with your milk is you can add 4 tablespoons of milk powder, of dried milk, to a pint of milk, and then you're doubling the goodness in that pint of milk. So you're not having to drink 2 pints of milk or use 2 pints of milk. You're just having to use the 1 pint, but that 1 pint that you've got, because you've added the milk powder to it, it's twice as good. And then you can use that milk throughout the day, just normally as you would.
Can you, I mean, it's been years since I saw powdered milk, and I recall it as being something that immediately goes to lumps. So how would you mix powdered milk with milk in your test kitchens? Do you need a
whisk.
blender?
Yeah, a whisk, a hand whisk should do the job. And what I often suggest to people is that they make that up at the beginning of the day and then keep it in their fridge. But you might find that it separates a little bit, so it might just need a little bit of a whisk before, you know, before you use it. But yeah, it does seem to dissolve, and you could always not add all the milk straight away. So add a bit of the milk with the milk powder and give it a good whisk, and then gradually add a little bit more. But it does, a whisk is a necessary bit of kit, I would say.
And it's not good enough to shake it, for instance.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. Yeah, a shaker would have the same effect. So if you have one of those shakers that you might make smoothies in, for example, what you're needing to do is just break up a few of the protein molecules so that the powder gets absorbed nicely. But yeah, a good tip. Yeah, a shaker would work too.
Right. Now, because we're talking about milk, of course, here in the UK, we get milk that is skimmed, milk that is semi-skimmed, and full-fat milk, as well as sort of Guernsey Gold Top. So would you like to comment on the various fat contents in milk and the relationship between having that fat in the milk in terms of absorption of the vitamins and minerals that are in the milk?
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, the more fat milk has in it, so like, for example, a whole milk, that will have more fat soluble vitamins in it.
Right.
Protein wise, comparing a whole milk to a semi-skim milk, quite similar. If you have parosmia or a reduced appetite, and you're worried that you're perhaps not getting enough calories overall in your diet, then absolutely, definitely go for whole milk, go for full fat milk, go for full fat yogurts, full fat cheese, because that is going to give you extra calories and the extra fat soluble vitamins as well. Now, if people aren't maybe lactose intolerant or prefer to use more plant-based milks, then plant-based milks really vary in their protein content. So I would suggest the best ones are pea milk and soya milk. They're the ones which are higher in protein compared to coconut milk, which is quite low, and surprisingly nut milks. Now, nuts are a great source of protein, but actually nut milks are not so good when it comes to protein.
Interesting.
And you can also get vegan milk powders as well. So if you wanted to do that trick with the milk powder to the milk to get the goodness of the 2 pints of milk in one, then you can get a vegan milk powders are available as well.
And I'm assuming that vegan milk powders are protein based. Would that be correct?
Yes, yeah, I think they're relatively new on the market, but I think the same theory could be applied. So go for more of a pea or soya based milk powder rather than nut or coconut based.
Right. Good. Okay. So nutrient dense foods.
Yes.
Beyond milk, what else can you recommend?
Yeah, absolutely. So I like to recommend to people, again, if their appetite isn't great and there's a limit of the foods that they can tolerate, that you try a little bit of experimenting with fortification of foods. Mm-hmm. And again, it goes back to that make every mouthful count. If you're going to, if eating is a struggle, make sure what you're popping in is going to give you a lot of nutrients and it's going to be really good for you. So for example, ground seeds and ground nuts are a really concentrated source of protein and also really healthy fats, omegas 3 and 6. So a really good source of lots of good nutrients. So really nutrient dense nuts and seeds. But if you can't eat them as they are, getting the ground version is a really handy way. And then you can add that into all sorts of foods. So you could add it into a bowl of porridge, or you could add it into smoothies, for example. If you wanted to make up your own smoothies, you could add it into that. Olive oil, again, really good source of good fat, not for protein, but good fats. And you could maybe drizzle a little bit of extra oil over maybe a pasta dish, for example. Mm-hmm. Or if you're making mashed potato, could you add a sprinkle of cheese in there to add some extra protein to it, or some natural yogurt, or jelly. If you're a fan of jelly, for example. Now, jelly is not a nutrient dense food. Jelly is just like nothing, is it? But there's something about jelly when you're poorly, I think, that it's quite comforting. So milk jelly, I don't know if people have made milk jellies before, but actually making jelly up, not with water, but with your fortified milk, a nice, quite refreshing dessert, perhaps. Cream is a useful one, just in terms of adding extra calories, extra energy to your food. So maybe a little drizzle of cream into your soup, make it look quite fancy, like you do in a restaurant. But that's another way of sort of fortifying your food and making it as nourishing as possible, which is really important to stop that unintentional weight loss.
The ground seeds and nuts that you mentioned, is that something that people should do at home? Because it is, for instance, you want to keep those nuts fresh and not oxidizing, or can people buy them, say, at the health food store pre-ground? What do you recommend there?
I think that's a preference thing. I think from a nutritional point of view, buying them ready ground is absolutely fine, especially, you know, if you're fatigued and you don't want to spend a long time in the kitchen because you're not really enjoying cooking and meal prep, you know, get them ready ground, absolutely. But making your own smoothies is a if you can, if you've got the inclination, then making your own smoothies is a great way of getting so many nutrients in there. You mentioned at the beginning, Chrissy, about meat and not perhaps being a massive fan of meat with parosmia, and therefore what comes into my mind when you say that is, oh my gosh, iron. Okay, you possibly going to be running the risk of not getting as much iron if you're not eating as much meat. A smoothie is a great way for adding some nice green leafy vegetables, which are going to be a really good source of iron. So yeah, adding fruit and vegetables into a smoothie with some ground seeds in there, some yogurt, full fat yogurt. Yeah, that's a good way of getting, that's an example of a nutrient dense smoothie right there. Yes,
and I'm a big fan and have used smoothies in periods when I've had really bad parosmia, and I do think they are a great solution when you just can't face going into the kitchen and cooking something. You just knock up a smoothie, and even if you can't drink the whole thing, you stick the rest in the fridge and have it later if you get a hunger pang. I know that a lot of you in the audience are going to have questions for Hannah, so do please use the Q&A channel for that. I see we've got one question in the chat, which I will answer, but I'm just going to ask the rest of you to please put your questions in the Q&A bar. So we've had this question. Here is my question related to vitamins, supplements, and minerals. I have been reading that there are not really any evidence-based clinical studies proving long-term health benefits from taking daily vitamins. Is it worth it to take a daily vitamin, and how is it going to help? And she goes on to say, for a reference, I'm a 30-year-old female, average body type, and have lost 20 to 30 pounds, about 12 kilos in the last 6 months. A marked difference began when I lost pasta and rice as safe foods. So that's, I'm very sorry to hear about that, because pasta and rice plain have been a mainstay for a lot of people. So she also says she's had parosmia for just over a year. So with a really reduced dietary intake, what can you say about taking vitamin supplements, vitamin and mineral supplements?
Yeah, no, great question. And yeah, sorry to hear about that. That weight loss does sound a concern. I think a supplement would be a good idea. Now, this brings us quite nicely onto something else I wanted to talk about, actually, because when we talk about supplements and nutritional supplements, vitamin and mineral supplements, my gosh, there's so many out there, and it can be so confusing as to where you even start. And I think we just need to think about the different types of those sorts of products that are out there. So there are nutritional supplement drinks, or they may be also known as meal replacement drinks. Now, those tend to include calories and protein and some carbohydrate and some fat, as well as micronutrients, which are known as vitamins and minerals. So you have the drinks like that. You then have vitamin mineral supplements, which are maybe in a capsule form or a tablet form, and they just do provide vitamins and minerals. So they are not going to get your protein, you're not going to get your calories, your fat, your carbohydrate from those. Now, if you've got a weight loss, like this, the lady who's asked the question, if you've got a significant weight loss, a vitamin and mineral supplement may well not give you enough, especially if you've lost some of those safe foods and you're not getting enough calories from the sounds of things and enough carbohydrates in your diet. So she might want to consider, actually, while things are quite bad for her at the moment, she might want to consider the drinks rather than just a vitamin and mineral supplement. The other category that's out there, just to add to the confusion, are things that you may have heard called protein shakes or protein powders. Now, these I would stay away from. I do not recommend these. These are the sort of products that might be aimed at people who are weight training, into bodybuilding, and they do just provide protein a lot of the time. Now, if you are weight training, then fine, but generally speaking, I'm assuming most of the people listening will not be in that situation, and you do not want to be having protein powders, and if you are not actually physically weight training and bodybuilding, because all those protein powders give you is, yeah, guessed it, protein. So they don't give you vitamins, minerals, not much in terms of calories or fat or carbohydrates. And what happens if you just give your body protein but you don't give it everything else that it needs, then the protein just gets used as fuel. So your body just thinks, oh, great, some nutrients coming in, that's protein. I don't care that it's protein, I'm just going to use it for energy because I need energy. And so it's not going to make any difference to your muscle strength, your muscle mass. It's just going to be used as energy. And actually long term, giving your body too much protein in those sorts of doses that are on some of these products is actually, we don't know, we potentially think that could actually cause more harm than good. So
right.
Stay away from those.
Right. And so we had a question on this theme from Dawn, who asked specifically about protein drinks for children who have had smell loss and have a reduced appetite. And so, Dawn, there's your answer. Certainly, I mean, where children are concerned, and maybe in a general sense, Hannah, this is a good moment to ask you, because we've got another group for parents of children who've had COVID. You know, coaxing children to eat who have no appetite and have lost their sense of smell and who may have parosmia, that is a very complex problem. Yeah. But you're saying stay away from anything that describes itself as a protein drink.
Yeah, if it's just got protein in it, it's not going to be useful to you at all. And I think with children, I'm just quite risk averse. I think go to the doctor. You know, if you're concerned that your child isn't gaining weight, you know, then go along to a doctor, get asked to see a pediatric dietitian, get some specific advice. But some of the things we've talked about around fortifying and milk, you know, that will work with children as well. And there are special prescribable supplement drinks that you can get from a doctor that will be specific for children. And I think that's really important. Don't give them supplement drinks, even those ones which aren't protein drinks. Don't give them supplement drinks that you might find on the shelves, say in a supermarket. Yep. To children. They're not aimed at children. Children's requirements for nutrition are very, very different. So really would encourage you to go to your doctor if you're worried your child isn't eating enough because of long COVID. Then
yeah. And let me ask you something else, because originally we got onto this topic because someone asked about vitamin and mineral supplements, so capsule form. Am I right to think that in order for the body to absorb these kind of supplements, you really also need to have food going along with it through the digestive tract? Is that correct, or am I incorrect in that?
Yeah, so in terms of when if you are taking a vitamin and mineral supplement, it is better to take it with food. Absolutely. Taking a vitamin and mineral supplement on an empty stomach can actually lead to a bit of tummy pains and things. So always take a vitamin and mineral supplement with food and with a glass of water to help you absorb it. Going back to what I said, there's so many out there. When you just if you're just purely looking at vitamin and mineral tablets, there's a whole raft of them out there, and some with very clever marketing strategies designed to make us spend a little bit more money than we want to, perhaps. You know what? I'm going to let you into a secret, because actually the simplest brands are actually the fine. Supermarkets' own brands are fine. And the best one to go for, if you feel you need a vitamin and mineral supplement because perhaps you're not getting your 5 portions of fruit and veg in a day, your diet's quite small in variety, then go for an A to Z. So make sure on the label it says A to Z, or it might say complete. Those are the ones to go for. So don't go for one that just says, okay, it contains A, C, and D, because, you know, where's the rest of them? You need all of them. So A to Z or complete. And then just have a little look on the label. I know the writing on those labels of those bottles is so small, but if you can, have a little look. And it will tell you, usually on a label, it will tell you what percentage of that vitamin or mineral it's got in it compared to what you actually need in the day, the sort of average daily recommended intakes. And if those quantities are like 1,000% or 2,000%, you don't need it. It's giving you too much. So you want that number to be around about 100%, and you don't want it to be excessively more, because often the ones which are excessively more are a lot more expensive, and you just don't need it. And in fact, fat soluble vitamins, so those ones which are A, D, E, K, we can store those in our body. So actually what happens if you're taking those vitamins in really high quantities, they can actually cause harm. And I've seen people say there's a lot on social media for people struggling with long COVID around taking mega doses of vitamin. Magnesium was one that was doing the rounds for a little while. And actually, if you take mega doses of magnesium, you can get awful stomach upsets. And then these people are having awful gastro symptoms. And actually, some of it was caused by taking huge quantities of vitamins and minerals. It's just not safe. They shouldn't really be selling them, to be honest. But you want to round about what they say, 100% of what they recommend. So double check the label. And actually, as I say, the cheaper ones are normally better.
Good to know, because of course, vitamin A is used intranasally, so through drops in the nose, is something that's been discussed on the absent networks. There have been some studies that show that is helpful for the recovery of the tissues in the nose that have been damaged. And then sometimes when people sort of read the headline but don't read the whole thing, they think that taking vitamin A supplements orally is the solution, and then they take too many. And I would agree with you that with fat soluble vitamins, we need to be cautious and read the label. I mean, that's what we always say for people to do. So Sarah, you asked a question about fat soluble vitamins. So I hope that is a good answer to your question.
Vitamin A is a potentially really dangerous one to take. People are, if ladies are pregnant, for example, vitamin A in high quantities can be really harmful to the baby. And there's also some evidence that with older people taking too much vitamin A is associated with the risk of fractures as well. So really want to be really cautious with vitamin A. Right.
Oh, well, that's very good advice. Thank you. I'm just going to go to read out some more questions. We're zigzagging around topics right now, but I think I'd like to get these answered because I'm sure there will be other questions as well as we go on. Michelle asked at the very beginning of the program, she says she's someone who has parosmia and anosmia, and the nausea and acid reflux and heartburn has appeared in the last few months. Is this strange considering that I'm 14 months into this torture? Also, is there a remedy besides Tums that you can suggest? So Tums, Hannah, if you don't know, this is a bit like Rennie tablets. And it's an interesting one because, of course, parosmia sometimes arrives much later than, it can be sort of 5-6 months down the line, sometimes after the initial infection. So what would you have to say about acid reflux and heartburn, and how can we mitigate that in the diet of someone who is recovering from?
Yeah, acid reflux and heartburn can be really nasty, really, really painful. There are a few lifestyle dietary tips that you can try with acid reflux and heartburn. People often find that it's worse at nighttime because you're laying flat. So acid reflux is what it sounds like. It's when the acid from your stomach travels up into your esophagus, into your gullet where it shouldn't be, and then obviously the lining of your gullet's sensitive and it detects this, and it can be a really unpleasant feeling. And so for some people it can even come as high as almost into the back of their mouth and give you an unpleasant taste as well, but causing all that pain really. If it is bad at night time, then do make sure you're not eating and drinking too near to bedtime. You want to have a good hour, 2 hours if possible before you go to bed, because if you've just eaten or drunk, you're much more likely to struggle with acid reflux. And if it is a struggle to get to sleep because of the pain, you try and sleep on plenty of pillows, or even put the pillows under the mattress, so prop the whole mattress up, just trying to sleep in a slightly more upright position, whatever you can get, it's most comfortable. But also when you're eating during the day, you you really want to be sat upright in a good chair at a table, have a really good posture, again, because it's going to keep the acid reflux down in the stomach. And then stay in that position if you can for an hour or so afterwards, ideally. And then I think there's something around seeing what your triggers are for acid reflux. So typically citrus, acidic foods will make things worse. Foods with a high fat content, yeah, those sorts of foods aren't usually helpful for acid reflux. Alcohol and caffeine, again, can be triggers for some people. Very spicy foods, those are all triggers for some people when it comes to acid reflux. So if you've got acid reflux plus parosmia, oh gosh, so difficult to actually try and meet your nutritional needs with those two together. But there's some really effective medication out there. So there is over-the-counter remedies like Tums. We have Gaviscon and Rennie in the UK. But there's prescribable medication which is stronger. So if you're not on that and you're struggling with acid reflux, then do go along to your doctor and ask about some prescribable medication to help manage that.
Yeah, I do think that is that's great advice, really, for anybody who's listening on the subject here of food, is that we're used to managing the smell problems kind of ourselves because there's very little that can be done by an ENT, for instance. But when it comes to these areas, food and nutrition and so on, I do think it is worth consulting a doctor if you really feel stuck. And certainly for something like acid reflux, I think that's really good advice, Hannah. Bridget has written, I have had this for a year now. At some points, I was hardly able to eat more than 600 calories in a day and lost weight. But now my safe foods are mostly junk foods. I feel sick if I don't eat, sick if I try and force to eat healthy foods, and sick from eating days of junk food. Now I am gaining. What is the middle ground? What do you recommend people to try and meet for daily macros? Now, I think this is really interesting, Bridget, because we spoke at the beginning of the program about weight loss, and we touched on weight gain, which is something that happens when people are chasing the experience of satisfaction. But just because you're staying at your, let's say you get to your original weight, that doesn't necessarily mean that you are getting good nutrition and that you've reached a sort of point of good health. So Hannah, maybe we could talk a little bit about that. I mean, how is it possible to have lost a lot of weight and then gain a lot of weight and yet not be kind of restored to good health? I'd like to hear what you have to say about that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. So what happens is that your body composition changes. So what I'm seeing in people with long COVID as well is that you may lose weight initially because you.
And would that be lost fat and lost muscle mass?
Yeah. So when you lose weight unintentionally, and especially if you lose weight unintentionally and very quickly, you lose muscle mass. Your body breaks down its own muscle stores to keep going, basically, for fuel. So you end up with a really depleted muscle mass. And that is what we are seeing with that hand grip measure that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
People may have noticed it themselves. They may notice that actually they feel a bit weaker. They don't feel as strong when they're carrying maybe shopping bags. They can't carry as much. They feel weaker because of that. And that's all a sign that your muscle storage is depleted. But then what happens is that if you are maybe having more junk food, as you described it as, and you're not as active, or you're just eating food that isn't perhaps the most nutritionally balanced, then the weight goes back on. But unfortunately, it doesn't go back on as muscle. It goes back on as fat. So you end up with a much higher percentage of body fat and a lower percentage of muscle mass. So you're weaker because you haven't got as much muscle, but the scales are saying you've put weight on, and then so therefore you're carrying much more fat about with you, which obviously isn't healthy from a longer term health point of view. And what people will find is that generally when fat goes back on, if you're not particularly active, it goes round your middle. So we get something called central obesity, which is then associated with other health conditions, which so not good, unfortunately. So trying to find that middle ground is tricky. You want to be getting a good variety of nutrients in. So it's making that list of safe foods, isn't it, and seeing which are going to give you the best range of nutrients. And if you can't stomach large amounts, then the bigger range of nutrients in a small quantity. And maybe it's using some of those useful drinks, the nutrient dense drinks, if you can stomach those, and trying to find healthier alternatives to foods that are high in fat and high in sugar. And I completely understand why people go for those, because it's a comfort thing. Psychology of eating and nutrition is just fascinating. We don't just eat for fuel, do we? We don't just eat that. We eat for comfort, for boredom, for loneliness, a whole raft of reasons, because we're low in mood. And the food we go for in those situations isn't carrots and apples, is it? No, it's foods that are high in fat and sugar, because they offer us a bit of pleasure, and happy memories are maybe associated with those. We've got some nostalgia there as well. It's not an easy cycle to break, and because it becomes a habit over time as well. So then you're talking about breaking a habit, which is hard work, doable, but hard work. It may be, again, asking for some extra support with that. So, you know, a dietitian could sit with you and look at what you're eating at the moment, look at your safe foods, and try and find a middle ground for you. It's quite hard for me to give that sort of specific advice without knowing what those foods are, really. I really do feel that everyone with parosmia should have access to a dietitian, at least for one appointment. If they want it, they should. And you know, the only way to get that is to ask, and is to go to your doctor and say, you know what, I've been living with this for this long. I'm really worried about the nutritional content of my diet, the long-term implications that this is going to have.
Right.
Would I see a dietitian, please? Right. And get access to one, because, you know, longer term, you're running the risk of running into deficiencies, aren't you? Nutritional deficiencies.
Is rectifying the problem of lost muscle mass as easy as just taking in more protein, or is it more complicated than that?
In its simplest case, it's taking in more protein, but what we've also said, of course, is taking in more protein alongside adequate calories, adequate energy, but also adequate micronutrients, vitamins and minerals as well, which vitamins and minerals help our body use the nutrients, use the food that we eat, and convert it into nutrients that are useful in our bodies. So all the time, we're going to need a range of nutrients in order to use that protein in the best possible way. So it might be having the backup of a vitamin and mineral supplement, a tablet that is going to give you, you know, your 100% of all your vitamins and minerals, and really concentrating on the protein and calories and carbohydrates, and doing it that way, finding the foods that work for you.
Thank you. Okay, now I've got another question here. We've got an anonymous person posting. Is there any advice on trying to manage weight? So I know that we've just touched on this, but I would like to read this question. I tend to eat calorific foods because it's easier. Cheese, white bread, things that don't take long to make. I have no inclination to want to cook, and I feel I can't eat a lot of food groups. So once again, we're talking about that area of where, you know, people might be making their way back up to a normal weight, and then perhaps surpassing that with foods that are not necessarily as healthy as they should be because of parosmia, of course. So yes, Hannah, one short word of advice there.
Gosh, it is. Oh, it's so tricky. It's so tricky. I mean, it depends what you can manage, and maybe it's about picking a few healthy foods that you think that you can tolerate yourself, and giving them a go, and maybe there's a bit of pushing through, perhaps. But you know, bread, ideally, yeah, with bread you'd be wanting to have wholemeal granary breads. Is there experiment to be had with trying some different brands of the healthier versions, seeing if you can find one that you like. Again, ideally with pasta and rice, you'd be wanting to go for the brown, the whole grain sort. Is there a brand that you can find that will work for you? If meat is a no-go, could you go for something like maybe lentils as a good source of protein? Get them in a tin because they've already been soaked. Throw them into a soup, for example.
Right.
And and just having a good look, maybe perhaps have a good look on the internet. And in the UK we use what's called the Eat Well Guide, which is our healthy eating diagram, and that shows you all the food groups. It shows you all the foods that are in all those food groups, and maybe trying some completely new foods that might be listed on there, and you think, you know what, I've never even tried that before, perhaps let's give that a go as a change and an experiment.
And that leads me on to another topic that we've discussed here on these webinars before on dealing with parosmia, and that is to continue to experiment and keep trying. I know that, as you say, we might want to go for the white, for the regular pasta rather than the whole wheat pasta. I had one horrible experience with whole wheat pasta, thought I would never eat it again. And then I found a brand that I thought was really quite palatable. And there's another kind of pasta that's gluten-free that is made with some other grain or something. And it really is got quite a nice texture to it. So people should continue to experiment and keep trying. I know it is discouraging, and nobody wants to throw food away, especially these days, with cost of living going through the roof here, especially here in the UK. I don't know what it's like in the US, but I know it's hard, but keep trying, everyone.
When you talk about grains, of course, there's a whole raft, isn't there, out there. We talk about pasta and rice. Those are the obvious ones that spring to mind. But then we've got things like couscous, for example. We have quinoa, polenta. It may be an opportunity to try something a little bit different. But on those days when you don't want to cook, don't be afraid to use a ready-made meal that's going to take the hassle and the pressure off the cooking. Some ready-made meals now are so much better than they used to be. And they've already, a lot of them have already got the protein, they've got the carbohydrate in there. You could add maybe a few veggies to them, try and make it a little bit higher in. They're not always so great in terms of vegetables, are they? But often they've got the protein and the carbohydrate right there. So ready-made meals are not a no-go. They're an awful lot healthier than say junk food, as we've been talking about.
And of course, sometimes it does happen that people, they really can't eat anything except these three foods, whatever they are, and sometimes those are not terribly a healthy combination, but I should think that it's better to eat something than eat nothing.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. Would this be a good opportunity just to talk a little bit more about the supplement drinks? I know we mentioned them briefly, but we haven't really gone into much detail, have we?
Yeah.
Because it just made me think, because what you said about eating something rather than nothing, and often these drinks are referred to as meal replacement drinks, but actually what I like to think of them as is more of a supplement drink. And actually, if you've got some foods that you can still eat, maybe still have those foods when you can at meal times, trying to keep in that routine of having meals and having some food at each meal, but then use these drinks as well as to sort of supplement what you can eat. And there's, again, so many ones out there, but these are the drinks that will also provide you with calories and protein and carbohydrate, vitamins and minerals and fat. So these are drinks that have got all of it in, and they are useful for those days when you can't manage very much at all. I had the lady I've been supporting with long COVID, who works in an office environment, and everyone around her in the morning is drinking coffee, and of course that is triggering for her. So she said to me, there's absolutely no way I can eat breakfast. I just can't eat breakfast when I'm surrounded by that. But what we did find for her is a supplement drink, and she could take that instead at breakfast time. And that then gave her enough energy to get through till lunch and then she was able to eat a normal lunch.
Right, interesting.
So they do have a use.
The drink that she was using, is it one that was pre-made in a tin, or is it something that she mixed herself at home?
It was a pre-made one, so her weight loss was quite significant. So we went down the route of a prescribable supplement drink. So these are available in the UK on prescription, and I'm sure in other countries as well. But there are plenty of these drinks that you can get, and you can buy. You can buy yourself as well. And in my experience, the ones that you can buy yourself are often a little bit more palatable than ones that you get on prescription. I can't imagine why. But the ones that you can buy in the supermarket or chemists or health food shops, they come in, like you say, in powdered form or ready-made. Right. And I think you've been doing some great focus group work, haven't you, Chrissy?
Yes, we did. We had a focus group where we looked at three different brands of meal replacement drinks. One of them was Huel. Then we looked at something called This Is Food, and the third one we looked at was Complan. And each one had its sort of good points and bad points. But I would, and naturally things like Huel are very expensive if you're going to buy the powder. It's a really big bag, and I think it's meant to last you a month if you eat it 3 times a day. So you're getting a very big portion, but you can buy Huel pre-made in the health food store in a tin. There's an awful lot of it. It's a really big bottle, and I found them to be quite oversweetened, artificially sweet. Well, with aspartame or stevia or something, one of these kind of sweeteners. And then the Huel ones were really quite, you got that mouth feel that was sort of oatmeal-y, ricey. It's not so well ground that you feel nothing in your mouth. You do get a sense that there's stuff that's been ground up in there. With Complan, it's a much smoother experience and much milkier. And of course, it's got milk protein is what it's based on, I think. But I would, it might be useful to try out 1 or 2 of the bottled drinks to see which ones you might like before going to the powder. But I think the risk always is when you go into a health food store here in this country, in the UK, that you're diverted by the protein drinks, and they really should be better segregated so people understand what's the right thing to buy and what's not the right thing to buy. And if you've wandered into the webinar a little bit later than at the very beginning when we were discussing this, we really want to be clear about the difference between protein drinks and meal replacement, where you get all the appropriate vitamins and minerals and fat and protein and everything. So I hope that is helpful for that on that topic. Right, a couple more questions here. Let's see. One question, is the metallic taste I often taste in my mouth a result of poor diet? I'm not sure. I think that would be the case, Michelle, because a lot of people report metallic taste, which can come from for a number of reasons. Hannah, do you have any experience of that being a result of poor nutrition?
I don't think it's poor nutrition. No, I think it's part of the smell disorder itself, and it can be really nasty. Don't use metallic cutlery, I would say, definitely, because it's only going to make that worse. So go for wooden or plastic as an alternative. Mouthwashes can be helpful sometimes, like sometimes menthol tasting can combat the metallic taste. So maybe give that a go perhaps. But no, I don't think diet related.
Okay. If we could go back to, we discussed nut milks and all the other different kinds of milk replacements. And we didn't mention oat milk. And I'm wondering what oat milk is like, if there's any kind of protein in it, or is it empty of protein?
It's better than nut milks, but it's not as good as soya and pea. milk. So it's a middle ground one.
It's interesting because I've found when I had my worst parosmia, and of course I'm just one person, everyone's different, but I did find that oat milk felt more soothing to my digestion. It just felt more comforting and more easier on my stomach.
So a good way to maybe fortify that oat milk would be to see if you could manage a little bit of a milk powder added into it, and you would get a little bit of extra protein that way.
Yeah, yeah. Good. Okay. Right. Let's see if we've got any other questions. If it is a 200 to 400% RDV of a fat soluble vitamin, is that too much to take every day?
Yeah, I would say so. So you, if what you're taking just contains that, so it's difficult for me to know whether that's part of a multivitamin or just that on its own. If it is just that on its own, it's just a fat soluble vitamin and it's saying 200 to 400%. Now, because the body is very clever and it can store these vitamins, you could just take that every other day. But if it's part of a complete multivitamin, then perhaps it might be worth looking at one that is going to give you slightly less of that and nearer to the 100% mark, so that you can take it every day. Because water soluble vitamins, if we take them in higher quantities than we need, well, the body doesn't store them. It just comes out when we go to the toilet. Yeah, it comes out in urine. So you do need to take them every day if you're taking them as a supplement.
Right. Okay, and I think we'll take one final question and then we'll start to wrap up. This person says, my daughter hasn't got any safe foods, but can eat a fairly nutritious diet with a nose clip. Will this have implications for healing of parosmia, as she is not exposing her senses to taste and smell? I think that's probably more a question for our clinical team when we next get them back. I think that as much smell training and exposure to smells as she can possibly stand. With food, it's a slightly different matter. She shouldn't be forced to push through the eating of any food if she can't tolerate that. But in general, I think with the nose clip off, she should be encouraged to smell everything that she can, and that will stimulate her olfactory tract, and that would be important. But I don't think there's any harm in her using the nose clip, but clearly she's not eating 24 hours a day, so she'll have the clip off sometime. Right. Okay. So Hannah, it's very exciting to meet you in this way. I'm looking forward to working with you in the future, and maybe to do other webinars on more specific topics, and perhaps working together to create some kind of advice sheet for people who have parosmia and are really struggling with their nutrition. So I thank you very much on behalf of everyone at Absent for joining me this evening. As you all know, these webinars are now being made available as podcasts, so you can download them and take them with you when you're on the go. If you're out walking the dog or doing anything else, you can have us in your ear. And I just would like to say again, thank you to Hannah. It's been lovely having all of you guests, and we will see you next time for the next Absent webinar. But for now, it's good night, and good night to you, Hannah. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.